Hello and welcome to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be doing a 2024 presidential matchup between Vice President-elect Kamala Harris and former Vice President Mike Pence. So far we have the safe states for either candidates filled out. The red states safe for Mike Pence. These are states he'll win by 12 points or higher. And the blue states, say for Kamala Harris, states she'll win by 12 points or higher. If you want to know the key for my safe, lean, likely, and tilt margins, you can see them in the description below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification. So let's get right into it. So this matchup would be a pretty interesting matchup because we'd have a former vice president who would probably be out of public life for around 4 years, coming back, securing the Republican nomination, and Kamala Harris, the incumbent vice president, again, probably sweeping her party's nomination as well, leading to a matchup, essentially a rematch, if you will, of these two candidates. They had faced off before in the 2020 election as vice presidential candidates, and will be facing as presidential candidates in the general. So we'll start this map going west to east. With the state of Nevada. In the 2020 election, the state of Nevada went to Joe Biden by around 2.7 percentage points, a little bit higher than Hillary Clinton's 2.5 percentage point margin in the 2016 election. However, it is worthy to note that the state of Nevada did move slightly to the left, but not to a very, not in a very shocking way. It was mostly a much smaller shift. But again, the basket of votes in Nevada is, of course, Washoe County. If Mike Pence wants to win the state of Nevada, he'll have to perform pretty well in Washoe County. Likewise, Clark County as well. This is where around 70 to 80% of the population of Nevada combined lives in. This is a very important area to do well. Republicans never win Clark County usually, but they can improve their margins there. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden won Clark County by 10 points. If we go back to the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton won Clark County by a little bit over 10 points. So both candidates will probably do very well, and I would not be surprised if Kamala Harris performs very well in these counties as well. As of this video, Nevada has not voted for a Republican for president since the 2004 election with George W. Bush. That trend is probably likely to continue. However, Nevada, I think, will be somewhat competitive in this matchup. However, Mike Pence is not typically the type of Republican that would win the state of Nevada. Again, this is the state with Las Vegas. Mike Pence is a very old-fashioned, neoconservative Christian, and that doesn't really play well in the state of Nevada. So I would give the edge to Kamala Harris. However, I think due to Republicans increasing the margins with Latino voters, as we saw in the 2020 election, I still think the state will be relatively competitive. However, Mike Pence doesn't have the charisma that somebody like Donald Trump had in making this state closer. However, I still think Kamala Harris will win this state anywhere from 2 to 6 points, probably around 5 or so in this case. Moving on down to the state of Arizona. So in 2020, again, the election results are not even finalized in the 2020 election. We're already jumping to 2024. But as of right now, Joe Biden has a 0.4 percentage lead in the state of Arizona. It's safe to say that this is a state that is going to be very competitive in the 2024 election, as it was in the 2020 election. This is a state that has traditionally supported Republicans. This is the first time the state of Arizona has gone blue since 1996 with Bill Clinton. So the state of Arizona does not elect Democrats very often. The areas where Joe Biden performed exceptionally well were the areas of Maricopa County, which is where Phoenix is located, and of course Pima County. These are the two most populous counties in the state of Arizona. In other parts of the state, if we go to the trends from 2016, most of the state did move to the left, but there were some rural areas, Santa Cruz County. These areas did move more to the right. However, urban Phoenix, Tucson, these are the areas of the state that are making Arizona grow, and these are the areas that are continuing to trend left. Also, again, Mike Pence is a much more old-fashioned, fundamentalist Republican candidate, so I think it would be very hard for him to win in Arizona, even a state that elects more traditional Republicans, just based on the fact that he will be tied to President Trump. So with that being said, I think Kamala Harris would have the slight edge in Arizona, although I'm very shaky on that call because I think maybe the fact that Mike Pence is an old-fashioned conservative could help him, but I think his ties to the Trump administration would hinder him in this case. Moving on to New Mexico, we won't spend a whole lot of time with New Mexico. New Mexico is a state that Republicans increased their overall margins in. However, the state did move slightly to the left since this was a state Joe Biden is on track to win by around 10 or so points. And this was a state that Hillary Clinton won only by 8 back in 2016. But that can be thanked most in part to the third-party factor of Gary Johnson. That definitely didn't help either of the candidates in terms of their raw margins. However, the state of New Mexico, even with Latinos around the country moving more to the right, I still think the state of New Mexico is probably going to stay likely Democrat. The state of Colorado is going to be safe Democrat. If we just look back at the 2020 election results, 55 to 41, this state is gone. Republicans are not winning the state of Colorado for a very long time. In places Republicans needed to perform very well, El Paso County, Pueblo County, these other counties, Republicans got crushed in the Denver suburbs. I think this state is going to be out of Republicans' reach for a very long time. And I don't think it was just an anti-Trump factor. I think Colorado has been rejecting Republicans, since the Obama administration. They've been continually, minus Cory Gardner's, fluke win in 2014. They've been rejecting the Republican message as a whole. Moving on to the state of Texas. This is a state that continues to get more competitive. Donald Trump, as of right now, has only won the state by around 5.7 points. That is much lower than his 9-point victory in the 2016 election. And if we look at the trends, all of urban Texas continues to trend more in favor of Democrats. And if we look at the trends in 2020, the same thing is happening. Urban and suburban Texas is getting much, much bluer. Even as the southern border counties get a lot redder, the Hispanic counties, it'll take time to really figure out whether that is just due to Trump as a person, if Trump was able to get these Latinos to jump ship and vote for Republicans, or if this is a trend that has just, for some reason, manifested itself in the 2020 election and will continue. It seems after 2008, Latinos have been moving more to the right in this country, and if current trends continue, I think that is likely to accelerate. However, that is off-put by suburban and urban voters. The rural Hispanic voters have been moving much more to the right in the state of Texas. However, urban and suburban Texas has been moving much more Democratic. However, I think part of that is an anti-Trump factor in the suburbs, and since Texas, like states like Virginia and Colorado, is becoming a mostly suburban state. But with that, I think Mike Pence has the slight edge. Texas tends to like the old-fashioned Republican neoconservative like Mike Pence, and those type of Republicans do a lot better in a state like Texas. So I think just based on that factor alone, I think Mike Pence will do better in the suburbs than Donald Trump did. I think Donald Trump really hurt Republicans in the state of Texas. On the contrary, Trump helped Republicans in a lot of other states, like the Rust Belt, the states they weren't traditionally winning, but their old guard, the states that were trending away, Texas, Arizona, and Georgia, he really did hurt down-ballot Republicans. But I think Mike Pence will do slightly better than Trump in the state of Texas. I think he'll still win it by a lean margin, but he will improve on Trump's probably a bit, maybe win it by 6. Unless, of course, the state of Texas trends more blue, which is very possible. Nebraska's second. I think Kamala Harris will probably win by a lean margin. I think it'll be around 2 to 3 points. Trump lost this district by around 7, but I think Kamala will win it just based on the fact that suburbs are continuing to trend more blue. I think they might trend back a bit, given the fact that 2024 isn't that far away. I still think suburbs as a whole are trending more Democratic, and I think the Omaha suburbs are no exception, and I think Kamala Harris will do well there. As we go through the Northeast, this is the type of area where Mike Pence is not going to be as strong. Again, he's very conservative, and I think in some cases he's too conservative for a lot of these states. I think Kamala Harris will probably win the state of Minnesota by around 5 or so points. I think she'll do slightly worse than Joe Biden did in the state, but I still think she'll win it by a lean margin. If we just look back at 2020, Joe Biden won the state of Minnesota by around 7 points. A lot more blue than Minnesota was just 4 years ago when Hillary Clinton barely eked out a victory in Minnesota by 1.5. However, I really think the third party factor did hurt both Trump and Hillary in the state. Mostly Hillary Clinton, apparently, because Trump didn't do that much better in 2020 as he did in 2016. And a lot of the talk about the Iron Range getting redder seemed to be just talk, because a lot of these counties did not get redder. They got bluer. If we look at the trends from 2016, these counties got bluer. The only areas that got redder were some rural counties in the western part of the state, but that's off-put by all these areas in the St. Paul and Minneapolis metro areas going much more heavily Democratic. So I think a state like Minnesota will be no problem for Kamala Harris to win. I think Iowa will still go to the Republicans, probably by a smaller margin, but Iowa tends to vote for the much more traditionalist Republicans. In the primaries, they voted for Rick Santorum. They are kind of a weird state like that, where they tend to swing back and forth from Republicans to Democrats, but when it comes to either party, they tend to like more of the progressive Democrats overall and the more conservative Republicans overall. So it is kind of an odd state in that way, but I think Iowa, just because of its swinging nature, will probably go to Mike Pence by a lean margin, probably around 5 or 6 points, the higher end of that. Similar to Trump, he might do a bit worse since, again, he doesn't have Trump's charisma, but he does have the advantage of being a Republican in a presidential election year. Moving on to Wisconsin. Again, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I think these states are going to be relatively comfortable for Kamala Harris, particularly because Mike Pence is a lot more to the right than the rest of the country is. As you can see, Kamala Harris has won the presidency by this projection. I do think Mike Pence is probably the weakest nominee that Republicans can run, solely based on his very right-wing social views, which have the rest of the country has shifted past that. And I think it won't play well. It'll play better in the South and the more traditionally conservative parts of the country, but I think in swing America, it's not going to be as favorable. I think Ohio will still go to Mike Pence, probably by a lean margin. I think Ohio is effectively the red Virginia, in the sense that Virginia is a state that is somewhat close, but Republicans will probably never win again in a presidential for a long, long time. Likewise, Ohio keeps trending more Republican. Virginia keeps trending more Democrat. If we look on our map, Virginia is a safe Democratic state. I think Democrats will have no problem winning the state of Virginia by around 15 points in 2024, just based on the trends. If we look at the shifts, let's go to 2016. Donald Trump only lost the state of Virginia by around 5.4 percentage points. But if we look at the trends, all of the growing areas of Virginia got a lot bluer. The only areas, a few exceptions, of course, some areas in Newport News got a bit redder. But overall, most of the state got a lot bluer, especially here in Nova and the Richmond metro area. In 2020, those trends were only exacerbated. The state got much bluer than it did in 2016 even, going to Joe Biden by around 10 points. And if we look at the biggest shifts, of course, we saw some flips. Virginia Beach, which is a county that hasn't voted blue since 1964, flipped to Democrat. Stafford County flipped to Democrat after decades of voting for Republicans. James City County, another county in Virginia that's been red for a very long time, flipped blue. And Chesterfield County. These are all areas of Virginia that were traditionally red, are now blue areas of the state. So I'm safe in categorizing Virginia as going to the Democrats. We'll move up to Maine and move our way down south. I think, again, Mike Pence would probably perform very poorly in the Northeast like Maine. The Northeast is more of a socially liberal, fiscally conservative kind of area, and also a very irreligious area. And I think Mike Pence's strong emphasis on a much more traditionalist Republican view, and that's what he has to offer. I think that will hurt him in a lot of the Northeast. It might help him in areas like the South, which are more used to that, but I think he's probably the worst candidate Republicans could field in 2024, except maybe Donald Trump himself, just because he lost one election. If he runs again, I think Americans will probably reject him again, based on what's happened. New Hampshire, I think, would go to Kamala Harris by a likely margin. Again, Joe Biden performed exceptionally well in the state of New Hampshire, which is quite bizarre. He won by 7 points, but What's really interesting in New Hampshire really likes to split ticket. So whereas Joe Biden won by 7 points, Jeanne Shaheen, Democratic senator, won by 15 points, and Republican Governor Chris Sununu won by over 30 points, 32 points. So we go from 32 points plus for Republicans and plus 15 for Democrats. So New Hampshire's a really swinging area. Again, this was a state Donald Trump barely lost in 2016. He only lost it by 2,000 votes, but the state has shifted much more to the left presidentially since then. I don't think it's out of reach for Republicans in the general, but in the case of Mike Pence, it probably will be. Moving on down to the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is a really interesting state to gauge because this was a state that Mitt Romney won in the 2012 election against Barack Obama. This is also a state that Donald Trump won by 3.6 percentage points back in the 2016 election. And if we go to the 2020 election now, the results aren't finalized, but it looks like Trump is probably going to win by a point or so, maybe a little bit over a point. So North Carolina getting a bit bluer, coming back to the center again. North Carolina went to Obama by a couple thousand votes, went to Romney by around 2 points in 2012, went to Trump by 3.6 in 2016, and now is swinging a little bit back to the left again. I think ultimately in this situation, North Carolina probably would stick with Mike Pence, and the reason I say that, very, very narrowly, and the reason I say that is because he's more of that traditionalist Republican. I think he could do slightly better in the suburbs than Donald Trump can. Also, the state, even though it is trending more left presidentially, it doesn't really seem to be trending as drastically blue nearly as fast as a state like Virginia or Arizona is, because there is old people moving down there as well that will vote Republican and kind of offset any Democratic gains. That being said, North Carolina still will be very, very contentious. However, I think based on this so far, I think this election is relatively going to be lower turnout per capita than the 2020 election, and I think that will slightly favor Republicans. Moving on down to the state of South Carolina, I think Mike Pence will have no problem carrying the state of South Carolina by a likely margin. He'll probably win it by around 10 points or so. If we look at the 2020 election so far, Donald Trump is on track to win the state of South Carolina, by a little bit under 12 points. I think Mike Pence will still underperform in the state of South Carolina. I'm getting them confused. As compared to Donald Trump, but I still think he'll do well because this is still a much more traditionally southern state. There's less people moving to the state of South Carolina as opposed to North Carolina or Georgia, and I think Mike Pence will do well. This is a state that's part of more of the traditional deep red South, like Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, Louisiana. All states Mike Pence is going to have no problem at all doing. This is the Bible Belt of the country. So I think Mike Pence will do fairly well in South Carolina. Georgia is a really interesting state to examine because this is a state that, as of right now, Joe Biden is on track to win the state. And even if he doesn't, this is a state that is getting very, very, very close. But it's a state that's trending blue very rapidly. If we look at the 2016 election, Donald Trump won the state of North Carolina by... what's happening? The state of Georgia by 5.1 percentage points. Again, if we look at the trends, urban Atlanta and the Atlanta metro has been trending heavily, heavily Democrat. This is the part of the state that is growing. The areas that are trending red are shrinking. And this trend is exacerbated in the 2018 midterms when Brian Kemp only won by 1.4 percentage points. I don't have that map up right now, but as we see now, Joe Biden is very likely to end up winning the state of Georgia. I don't really see this trend stopping. I think Kamala Harris will probably eke out a narrow victory in the state of Georgia by under a point or so. Maybe 2 points, but that's on the higher end of tilt. I think Georgia, even though it is trending massively blue, there is a chance it could snap back, but again, I'm making this prediction right after the 2020 election. We'll have a more solid matchup probably after 2022 when we can really see how the midterms went for Republicans. Finally, we have the state of Florida, and I think the state of Florida will go to Mike Pence narrowly. I think he'll win it by around 1 point or so. In 2020, we saw the real shock, and this really did surprise me. Donald Trump performed very well in the state of Florida, winning it by around 3 points and doing very well among Cuban and Hispanic voters in places like Miami-Dade County, running up the margins in the Tampa area, doing better in the Orlando metro area, and still holding strong in the Panhandle. This is a trend Republicans need to continue. They need to pay attention to Florida. They can't abandon it and think this is going to be a safe state for them, but Florida is continuing to trend to the right, and I don't really see that trend stopping even with Mike Pence. So this is the final election matchup. Kamala Harris, 303 electoral votes to Mike Pence, 235 electoral votes. Comment your thoughts down below. I know there's going to be people that disagree with me, but if you enjoyed this analysis, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you never miss another video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.